In the past 5 months, headline after headline has said something about the unprecedented amount of violence that the transgender community in Jacksonville has seen. And that's because there have been 3 Black transgender women who have all been murdered in Jacksonville. Another woman suffered critical injuries after her on-again, off-again partner attempted to gun her down. That man has since been arrested. However, the murders of Celine Walker, Antasha English, and Catalina James still remain unsolved. The murders of those 3 women account for 23% of all the transgender murders in the nation. That means that Jacksonville, Florida leads the nation in the number of transgender murders. Amongst all these statistics and all of this violence, there's a 4th transgender death that nobody is talking about. This is Postmortem with Destiny. I'm a digital reporter at First Coast News, and I've been there for about 2.5 years. Sometimes being a digital reporter means sharing that dog meme, and sometimes it means answering the phone. But most days it means following that gut feeling. And I'll be really honest with you, this story begins and ends with that gut feeling. There are more questions than answers. I just want you to brace yourself.
Things will come to pass. We are legion.
This all began because I was covering the transgender violence in Jacksonville and the community outcry because of it. When a coworker came up to me and said, you know, these murders that have been going on, they're not the first transgender deaths here in Jacksonville. My coworker did a story on a transgender woman named Athena Cadence. At the time, she was 30 years old, and she's an Army combat veteran. She did this story in November of 2017, and then a couple months later, Athena Cadence was found dead. It was ruled to be a suicide, but my coworker told me that Athena's family and her wife just couldn't believe that Athena would commit suicide. Now, journalism can also make you a little jaded. It's my first inclination to think that any family member of anybody who would take their own life would feel that way, because I think it must be really hard to assume that somebody that you love and care about would be in such a bad place that they would feel like they couldn't reach out to you. I told that to my coworker, but I said that I would pull the autopsy report anyway, because when autopsy and osteology reports roll through the office, I'm usually the go-to gal. That's because my mom has been a crime scene investigator for 15 years, and before my dad retired, he was the only crime scene investigator in our very small town for years and years. So I've grown up around the lingo, I've read plenty of reports, and I'm here to tell you it's nothing like the show. So when I pulled Athena Cadence's autopsy report, it did say that her cause of death was suicide. But there was something in that autopsy report that I had never seen in an autopsy report dealing with a suicide. In fact, I'd never seen a detail like this outside of an autopsy report dealing with a violent event. But before we get to that, I'm gonna back up because this isn't the first time that Athena Cadence has made news headlines. In 2016, Athena went on a 64-day hunger strike in San Francisco to bring to light the mistreatment of transgender inmates in the jail she was in. At the time, there were policies in place stating that transgender inmates would be put in the population of their gender, being male or female. Instead, all of the transgender inmates were being housed together away from general population. Athena broke her hunger strike after she was let out of jail. It's worth noting that Athena was in jail for an assault and a false imprisonment charge. In a San Francisco Chronicle article, she said this was due to a psychotic break that she had because she was prescribed the wrong medication in November of 2015. I'll also mention that Athena has documented mental health issues. However, I urge you to keep listening to this story because this is a narrative we've heard before: veterans with mental health problems. This isn't the end of the story here. Sometime in 2017, Athena and her wife moved to Orange Park in Clay County. Athena purchases a plot of land where she plans to build a house. However, that plot of land is a swamp, and unfortunately, there can't be any developing done on it. Athena's wife said that she tried to support Athena even though she seemed really wrapped up in the future on this piece of land. She said when it became really evident that there was no future on this piece of land and that Athena wouldn't hear of it, it caused some strain between them, and her wife returned to the West Coast. This is when my coworker did the story on Athena. In November of 2017, the story was about how neighbors were concerned because Athena was living out of her car and in a tent on this plot of land. What they didn't know was that she was also living part-time in a hotel in Jacksonville. And on January 9th, 2018, she was found dead inside of that hotel room. The cause of death was listed as intoxication by diphenhydramine, which is the fancy name for Benadryl. That in and of itself isn't incredibly remarkable. In her liver tissue, there was almost 9 times the amount of Benadryl that should be in there. So the limit is 2,000 nanograms per gram, and in her liver, 170,000 nanograms per gram were found. However, I'm going to read to you an excerpt from Athena's autopsy report. This is from the external examination portion of the report, which is just a visual look at the body done by the medical examiner at the medical examiner's office. It reads, "The mouth is covered by layers of black duct tape with sharp cut edges. The inside surface of the duct tape has fragments of blue-green plastic-like material. A pink substance is at the edges of the duct tape, mouth, and t-shirt." I've never known somebody to commit suicide by overdose and tape their own mouth shut. I logically can't think of a reason that isn't a stretch. The only 2 assumptions I could come to on my own were perhaps she taped her mouth shut to keep herself from vomiting up the pills that she had ingested, or she taped her mouth shut to ensure that if she passed out and vomited, she would choke on the vomit. Both of those are pretty gruesome realities of what happens to somebody when they overdose, but people overdose all the time and they don't go around taping their mouth shut. At least I didn't think they did. So the first thing I did was take this autopsy report into the investigative journalist cave at First Coast News and asked one of my coworkers who's been on the crime beat for much longer than me. I asked if she'd ever heard of this phenomena happening, and she said no. We also gave it a Google to see if it was just one of those gruesome things that people were mum about because it was too heartbreaking to talk about. We didn't find anything on the internet either. So then I did what any young adult does, and I called my mom. And I asked her if she'd ever heard of this happening, if somebody would tape their mouth shut when they committed suicide. And I didn't tell her the way that Athena committed suicide. I wanted to see if she could come to this conclusion on her own, or if she, what information she had to share. My mom said in 15 years and countless crime scenes, she'd only seen it twice. Both times, the victim had put the tape over their mouth and nose to aid in asphyxiation. They also put bags over their heads. Now, Athena did not die via asphyxiation, she died from intoxication from Benadryl. So I don't understand. I don't understand where this black duct tape came from. And unfortunately, an autopsy report is just a contextless look at a body on a table. It doesn't say anything about the kind of person that Athena was. It doesn't say anything about what she was feeling. You can't look at a brain and know if somebody was in a dark place. You can't look at a brain and know what the rationale behind duct taping your own mouth might be, if that is indeed the case. But if I didn't pull at this string, if I didn't talk about this, I wouldn't be doing my job effectively. So here I am talking about this. And I want to be very clear that this doesn't necessarily mean that I think that Athena didn't commit suicide, but it's very strange. All I know is what this autopsy report says at this point. Athena's body otherwise was unremarkable. If I had to guess, that pink substance around the duct tape and in her mouth and on her shirt was her body trying to purge the Benadryl, which is often pink pills. As for the fibers on the duct tape, I don't know what that is. It was taken off and submitted as evidence. I have requested the supplemental reports from the responding agency who found Athena's body. That's the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. It takes a while to get these reports usually, but what they are is a report from every officer who responded on scene. It will give us a look at what the hotel room looked like, what she looked like when they found her, whether there was a bottle of Benadryl anywhere, was there a roll of duct tape somewhere. There are a lot of questions that these supplemental reports may be able to answer. They'll also have witness accounts, if any neighbors heard anything, if they heard an argument, or if Athena was reaching out for help, or if they heard Athena vomiting, or anything like that. In my plight to make sense of the transgender violence going on in Jacksonville and also this very strange detail in Athena's autopsy report, I talked to Dr. Turner. He's a clinical forensic psychologist, and he works mostly out of Texas and Louisiana, but he travels all over the country and he often testifies in federal cases. And he said that there's something called a psychological autopsy. And what that is a look at medical records to see where somebody's mental state was before they commit suicide, before something happens, to be able to understand if there was any markers or any indicators that might show that this behavior was expected. Unfortunately, these medical records are only released to next of kins, powers of attorney, and definitely not journalists who are maybe snooping where they shouldn't be. When I talked to Athena Cadence's estranged wife, she said the last time she spoke with her was in December of 2017. Athena was in the hospital with kidney failure due to dehydration. Athena's wife told her that maybe she should get help because if she was in the hospital for dehydration, she wasn't taking very good care of herself. They had a little bit of a falling out because of that. I asked her, now that some time had passed since Athena had passed away, if she thought it was possible that Athena might commit suicide. She said she couldn't be sure. She said what I already knew, that Athena struggled with some psychosis problems. She also said that Athena had disclosed to her that she had made suicide attempts before, but still, she was surprised to know that Athena had committed suicide because Athena was living her life as an out and proud trans woman, and she didn't appear to be in that dark place anymore. She had a lot of hope tangled up in this lot that she had, and she seemed really driven. When I asked her if there was anything else I should know about Athena while I was covering this story, she said, in a text message, "For the time that I was lucky enough to know her, she was the light in my life. She set me free. I don't know if that's the sort of thing you were asking for, but she was a beautiful and unique person who felt so deeply for the people she loved. I will always feel the pain of her absence from my life." And I think that's really important to bring up when we talk about death in our community, because Athena was somebody's wife, she was somebody's daughter, she was somebody's sister, and it's important to talk about her death. Her name was Athena Cadence, and she was the first transgender woman to die in Jacksonville this year.